Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out this hot day. It's a good day to be in a museum. Want to welcome everybody on behalf of the Board of Trustees, the Portland Museum of Art, and my colleagues and the staff here. We are just thrilled to have you here for the opening of this unbelievable Winslow Homer exhibition. My name is Mark Basir, and I'm the Judy and Leonard Lauder Director here, and we're, as I said, just so happy to have you with us. I would first like to acknowledge that we are convening tonight's celebration in the land of the dawn, a region encompassing present-day Maine and the unceded homelands of the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, and Abenaki nations. Together, these nations represent the Wabanaki Confederacy. They have stewarded these lands and waters for thousands of years before the establishment of national borders and state lines, and continues to do so today. About 20 years ago, the Portland Museum of Art purchased the Winslow Homer Studio. If we had not, thank you, yes, it was a big moment. I appreciate that. If we had not, it might have disappeared into private hands with no public access. Working with Chip Willauer, who at the time owned the studio, one of the great-great-grandnephews of Winslow Homer, and the Willauer family, together we were able to make that happen. When I go out to the studio, there's so many different types of tours you can give out there because there's so many good Homer stories. I always sometimes like to begin with reminding people, kind of to give you the gravity of the place, not that they need it once you get out there, that it's kind of like Monet's Giverny and also like O'Keeffe's Abiquiu. For these three artists, this location where their studios changed their artistic experience as well as the history of art. So the idea is there are many artist studios, but these three artists, the very location where they had their studios changed the trajectory of their art. And it is here in Maine, in Scarborough, in the studio, that Homer made his etchings, reflecting on the great painting Lifeline, which is upstairs. It's also here where he transforms watercolors. He makes the amazing nature paintings and sea paintings like Our Weather Beaten. And I do feel he is the quintessential artist of his time. He's the perfect artist to showcase as we ponder the 250th anniversary of this country. He's also one of the few artists who has never lost his stature. He thrills all generations and people of all ages. At the PMA, we have a little saying that I like to use, which is that Homer is in the DNA of the PMA. He arrives here in 1882 when the PMA was founded. He hires John Calvin Stevens to design the studio, and John Calvin Stevens built our first museum building, the Lorenzo de Medici Sweat Memorial Galleries, in 1910, and that's also the year that Winslow Homer passes. I.M. Pei built the Payson wing that we're here in 1982, on that 100th anniversary, for the Payson Homer collection. The deal with the Paysons was, we love your institution, but you need a better building to have our Homers. This building was built to house those Homers. And this was then followed by unbelievable gifts from the Osher and the Berger families. This is partially why the studio and the Homer are so important to the PMA and also to the state of Maine, and why this exhibition can really only be here and will not travel. I'd now like to take a minute to share with you a little bit of the momentum at the PMA. We recently purchased the adjacent land, including a parking lot next door and the Maine Health corporate headquarters. We love our campus and our buildings, but the aging infrastructure no longer serves our community, our artists, our staff, or our art collection well. This consolidation enables us to solve our #1 complaint. Do you all know our #1 complaint? Parking. Parking is our #1 complaint. Every box, every time, parking. So one of the things we've been able to resolve with is that, sounds kind of crazy, museum director is so excited about parking, but I cannot tell you how happy our staff are not to hear, yes, we understand there's not enough parking, but we now will have enough parking. And maybe some of you all used our parking lot today. It will also provide space, not the parking lot, but the campus. We will also provide more space for your collection, your community activities, for artists to experiment, and also for art storage, and an auditorium for the other people who are not able to attend today's lecture. We will be opening up that public parking lot because traditionally that parking lot had been closed to the public, and this community, in terms of the local businesses, are dying to have this parking lot open to help their businesses. And we think we're gonna really have a thriving local economy, so we have more people coming downtown. We're also gonna move our offices over to that new building and build art storage vaults in that building. This enables us to transform thousands of square feet to the existing buildings, adding 10,000 square feet for our art collection, including making the McClellan House a decorative arts center because we have such a great decorative arts collection. Pretty soon this fall, we will be opening something called the PMA AMP, AMP, which is PMA in reverse. This park is going to be a collaborative space to work with other organizations in Portland and this community to have more people coming downtown and celebrating the arts together. Rooted in the museum's commitment, it's going to provide installations and film and dance right here in Congress Square to bring people, as I said, downtown. The AMP is designed by our architects, Lever, and will transcend the spirit of the new wing that will soon be coming. It's a role model for sustainable design. We are using main resources, something called structural round timber, which is a whole tree which will be sequestering carbon and be a model for future building with wood products, particularly wood products from the state of Maine. In fact, the wood will have what we call a chain of custody, which is kind of unique in the wood industry. The space will give you a taste of how the new wing will serve our community and how the design will bring together urban and rural communities together with what we like to call a circular philosophy. And of course, we plan to be in the new wing in 2032, which is going to be the PMA's 150th birthday and the anniversary of Winslow Homer coming to Maine. Moments like this exhibition happen because of the work of talented staff, the partnership of lenders, colleagues across the country, and because of generous supporters like all of you members here today. Your belief in this institution makes work of this caliber possible. We're deeply grateful to the individuals, foundations, and corporate partners who also made this exhibition possible. As arts funding is becoming increasingly challenging, I'd like to actually read out all the names of those cultural heroes who know that creativity is the essence of life, and it's also the backbone of our country. So please hold your applause for one big applause after I read this group of names to thank them. Charlton and Eleanor Ames, Gay and Tony Barkley, Susan Bateson and Stephen S. Fuller, Isabel and Scott Black, the Goodell family, Jeffrey and Judith Kane, Cynthia and Bob McDonald, DeSorcy McIntosh, the Robert Nanovic family, Terry and James Vogel, Carol Warner and Edward Cook, the American Historical Print Collectors Society, the Berger Collection Educational Trust, the Hoyt Charitable Foundation, Rosemary Kevin and Hannah Rose McNeely and the KHR McNeely Family Foundation, the Lunder Foundation, the Peter and Paula Lunder family, the Robert Lehman Foundation, Wyeth Foundation for American Art, Bath Savings Institution, the Bear Bookshop in Marlborough, Vermont, First Pier, Ocean View at Falmouth and Cumberland Crossing by Ocean View, McCandless LLC, Northern Light Mercy Hospital, Maine Public, and New England Distilling. Thank you all so much for your support. And thank you for your patience. I just do believe in the way arts funding is going to be able to thank these folks for their efforts to make this happen. It takes a huge family to put on an exhibition like this. Finally, I want to mention also that I don't have the catalog here, but you'll see it. There is a very beautiful catalog for this exhibition, and it would not have been possible without the Friends of David Tatum Fund. David Tatum was an American art historian and world-renowned Winslow Homer expert associated with Syracuse University. Over the course of his prolific career, David published many field-defining examinations of Homer's work, among them several devoted to his printmaking, including his etchings. To honor his legacy, David's devoted friends, Ann Hutchinson, Scott Lowe, Jay Polliner, and Jenny Riggs, with the support of his wife, Cleota, who recently passed, garnered support among their friends and colleagues for this project. It's our privilege to dedicate our volume to his honor, and we're honored to have some of David's family and friends with us here today, so thank you. Again, thank you for your patience. We're almost ready for the main stage. It is my pleasure to introduce Rami Mize and Judy Walsh, the stars of today and the stars of this exhibition. Rami Mize is currently the Susan G. Detweiler Associate Curator of American Art at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. From 2022 to 2026, she was the Associate Curator of American Art here at the Portland Museum of Art. She specializes in art of the Americas from the 19th century to the present day, with a focus on cultural exchange, expressions of place, and intersections between indigenous and settler art. Her work has been supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Center for Craft, the Toma Foundation, the American Historical Print Collector Society, as well as the Tara and Wyeth Foundations for American Art. She holds a BA from UNC at Chapel Hill and an MA from the Courtauld Institute and a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. Judith Walsh, Judy, a paper conservator and friend of the museum, has tended the very collections that hold most of Winslow Homer's work: the Museum of Fine Arts, Worcester, National Gallery of Art, Clark Institute, Bowdoin College Museum of Art, and of course here at the PMA. Judy has been researching, lecturing, and writing about Homer for more than 4 decades. In 2019, she was named an honorary fellow in the American Institute of Conservation for outstanding contribution to her profession. Judy is now lucky enough to live on Peaks Island, and apparently there's a Peaks Island fan club here. Yay, Judy. Judy, as I said, is lucky enough to live on Peaks Island, where every day she enjoys exactly what pleased Homer: rocks, waves, and wind. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Mark. As he shared, I have had the immense pleasure of organizing the present exhibition, Winslow Homer, Painter Etcher. It is a true delight to be here with you all today, and an honor to be co-presenting this lecture with my esteemed colleague and dear friend, Judy Walsh. For our talk today, we will be offering an overview of the themes, artworks, and discoveries of this project. I will begin by exploring the show's focus and scope through an art historical lens. Judy will then share the many fascinating technical details of Homer's print practice from her perspective and expertise as a paper conservator and someone so steeped in his life and work. The opportunity to collaborate and merge our trainings in art history and conservation has enriched this study immeasurably, and we hope our lecture will demonstrate how fruitful that combination can be. When Winslow Homer deposited several of his etchings to secure copyright at the Library of Congress in 1889, he indicated dual layers of artistry by inscribing Winslow Homer Painter in the lower left and Winslow Homer Etcher in the lower right. Can you all see that here? Okay. These annotations appear across 2 impressions, including the one you see here, fly fishing Saranac Lake. Though the signatures served a practical function of proclaiming his role on both accounts, they also signal something more emblematic: Homer's persistent and emphatic identification as a printmaker, even while his career as a painter was reaching new heights. In this way, the inscriptions poignantly allude to his long-standing exploration of a wide spectrum of graphic and painterly media. And Winslow Homer, Painter Etcher, centers this rich interplay between painting and print that animated his process throughout his life, a transmedial process that is especially potent across the series of etchings that he produced in the 1880s. And we were really excited to bring in his hand and those signatures into the exhibition design, as you see here, and hope you get a chance to check out the galleries after this. Indeed, the majority of Homer's etchings were intended to translate compositions in oil and watercolor. These include The Lifeline from 1884, 8 Bells from 1887, 3 from 1888, including A Voice from the Cliffs, Perils of the Sea, and Mending the Chairs, and 2 from 1889, Saved, and the fly fishing print I just showed you. Homer also explored several trial prints after his 1886 painting Undertow, and he also produced an etching that was more in line with his work from the 1870s, Girl Posing in a Chair, that we think was his first attempt in the medium. Despite Homer's relatively limited output in this intaglio technique, he later asserted that the etchings, along with some of his watercolors, were, quote, as good work as I ever did. The prints themselves are ample testimony to this claim, featuring extravagant line work, delicate veils of tone, and elegantly modeled forms. They harness the properties of this complex medium to extraordinary effect while refining some of the artist's most iconic themes to new degrees of poetic depth. Given the etching's virtuosity and Homer's own acknowledgement of them as among the most important art he ever produced, this exhibition seeks to restore their significance within popular understandings of his oeuvre, while offering viewers an unprecedented opportunity to see the prints in dialogue with the paintings that inspired them. And I just want to emphasize this. This has never happened before, and it's likely it will not happen again in our lifetimes, to bring these prints together with this source material and to bring together this volume of Homer's prints from across the long arc of his prolific career. So it's a real treat, and I'm just so happy it happened. Thank you all. To foreground Homer's etchings as serious artistic pursuits is also to nuance previous narratives that perhaps overstate a divide between his initial work as a printmaker and his second career in painting. As is well known, printmaking constituted the core of Homer's earliest and arguably most formative artistic development. From 1855 to 1857, he apprenticed with John Henry Bufford, a Boston-based commercial lithographer. Though Homer emerged from this training as an accomplished lithographic draftsman, he found little reward in the experience, which he later reported as a treadmill existence. For the next 18 years, he preferred the independence afforded by freelance work as an artist designing wood engravings for illustrated newspapers and magazines. But we were thrilled to really show these early roots. We were equipped, thanks to Peggy and Harold Osher, a gift from them in the early 90s, that brought a vast array of this material to our collection. And we can show his prints from this earliest point to almost the last. And this is thought to be one of his earliest essays in print. And it's a lithograph that he designed in Bufford's employ for a book of picturesque scenery promoting Ottawa for Canada's capital. But just amazing to have this glimpse into Homer. He's in his early 20s at this point, and well on his way to developing his artistic voice and seeking that creative autonomy that he really craved. When the US Civil War began in 1861, Homer was firmly established in his career with the commercial pictorial press and embarking on his prolific output that would ultimately encompass over 250 illustrations that were featured in a broad range of periodicals, from Harper's Weekly, most well known, to Every Saturday, The Galaxy, Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper, and many others. But with the outbreak of the war, Harper's Weekly specifically employed Homer as an artist correspondent, sending him to the war front in Virginia several times with General George McClellan's Army of the Potomac, where he made numerous drawings of the military experience there. This composite image, which is on view in the first gallery of the exhibition, offers a patchwork of multiple vignettes and speaks to the hunger for information from the front for Union audiences back home, and vice versa, with the exuberance of the soldiers receiving the newspaper train at lower right. And in this issue of the Weekly, where this spread appeared, the editors wrote, quote, "News of the war, we all live on it. The only thing which thrills every heart nowadays is the news of the war. Mr. Homer, we think, has done justice to the subject." Here he also pays special homage to his own work as a documentarian of the war's actors and events, as seen in the lower left corner. This is likely his friend Alfred Woad, who is also a special war artist, capturing those events. And Judy and I were just talking before this lecture, just thinking about how these engravings, they're so engaging and compelling to us today, but if you imagine that there was such a much lesser degree of images permeating everyday life at this period in the 19th century, you can imagine how exciting and thrilling and impactful illustrations like this were for the reading public. This image of a Union sharpshooter is one of Homer's most haunting and enduring subjects, and it supplies the sightline into our exhibition of Painter Etcher. And we conducted this pairing to really show how indelibly linked Winslow Homer's paintings are to his prints. The sharpshooter painting was debuted in 1863, but the related engraving was published a year prior, and the caption notes that it was from a painting by Winslow Homer. So he's conceiving of them simultaneously, and so we see the roots of this transmedial engagement and relationship between his paintings and prints that we see as another pattern when he later approaches etching in the 1880s. And this particular print is just an incredible enactment of that closeness between vision and violence in the precision of a wood engraving, which is done, on the surface of boxwood, this really sharp line that you can achieve. And we see how Homer is electing to include certain details in the print that he omits from the painting, and that sort of comparison across the two is endlessly fascinating, and how he is distinguishing them. Homer also revisits lithography during the war, and he has a more positive relationship with this particular print medium thanks to his friend Louis Prang, who helmed Prang & Co., an eventual rival of Currier and Ives. And by the time of this collaboration, Life in Camp from 1864, we're seeing a visual commentary on army life with a more satirical humor. This series includes images of soldiers resting, eating, and reacting to the realities of day-to-day existence, and Homer is alighting upon the ordinary, intensely, and comically human incidents that transpired even under these extraordinary circumstances. And again, we see him noting the efforts of the special war artist here, our special, and that was thought to be a caricature of himself in the field. The first gallery of this exhibition really revels in this formative period of training on the job for Homer, and we really wanted to show how immersed he was in this wide range of print material and this sort of continually expanding realm of reproductive technologies, that he was embracing them, he was working amongst them, and he was well versed in them. So by the time we get to the etchings somewhat later, they're not coming from nowhere. He has the mindset for them. And this is a great pairing here where we wanted to show kind of the materiality of these images. In some instances, they are framed as images sort of cut out of the newspapers hanging up. This is his well-known image, Snap the Whip, on the left, that's based on two paintings. But then some are kept in bound volumes that keep those newspapers intact. And so it's fun to see how the image interacts in that format. And we also were lucky enough to borrow The Noon Recess from Colby College Museum of Art's collection, another wonderful pairing that shows Homer's paintings and prints and how he's deriving a lot of energy and detail in moving across them. And I also like to note how the scale is somewhat similar in these, before he's kind of embarking on larger scale works as his painting practice continues. Over time, Homer experienced frustration, however, with the layers of mediation that were required to make a wood engraving. After making a drawing that he would send to Harper's Weekly's team, his involvement in the image production ended. From there, a team of professional wood engravers would carve the block, I'll go back to this, to prepare it for printing, gouging away all the negative surfaces to have a linear design in relief. This relief matrix was ultimately electrotyped to create a sturdy metal version that would facilitate printing at a mass scale. This process destroyed the underlying drawing and inevitably introduced variables beyond the artist's intent. And this is often cited as one of the reasons for Homer's eventual abandonment of illustration work, that and his own very serious ambitions to sustain himself primarily through painting. Beginning in 1875, he prioritized oil and watercolor, but as our project insists, he remained keenly interested in the possibilities of printmaking. And this was especially true for etching, a print technique that offered a greater degree of artistic command and satisfaction than he had found in these previous methods. Judy will share more about how etchings are made and the incredible chemical process behind them. But in brief, etching is a printmaking process that uses acid to inscribe lines on a metal plate. and these incised lines create the final image by holding and transferring ink when pressed to paper. And a lot of artists at this time, there was a surge of interest in the medium. It was a movement known as the American Etching Revival, and artists really championed etching and cited its kinship to drawing, because rather than sort of carving and laboring into a wood block or a metal surface, the grounded surface of the plate allowed for these fluid lines to be made, and this connection between an artist's vision and mind and their hand and the resulting drawing was something increasingly celebrated at this point in time. This revival first emerged in France and England around the middle of the 19th century and soon expanded to other countries, including here in the United States. When Winslow Homer exhibited his painting, The Lifeline, at the left, at the National Academy of Design in 1884, it was heralded by critics as one of the pictures of the year and immediately sold for the highest price Homer had yet seen in his career. And Homer anticipated the success of this great image and decided to put an etching forward at the same time. And an etching, by virtue of its reproducibility as a print, enabled the image to circulate more widely and at a more accessible price, while amplifying Homer's artistic reach and reputation. The etching that he produced after his great Lifeline showcases his ambition and his struggle in equal measure as still building his skills and dexterity in this medium. It still remained somewhat new to him, and he was learning the subtleties of line and tone from a New York-based master printer and a key collaborator for him in this work, George Wisterhodge Ritchie. Homer learned a great deal about the medium from Ritchie, going so far as to self-identify as his student in a letter from 1888. Quote, "I am at work now and will finish in about 2 weeks an etching, which I will bite here and send to you for a proof. It promises to be worthy of your pupil, which is more than I can say of some of my recent work." So in his classic terse and downplayed way. In the exhibition, we were thrilled, and it was a very important point for us to bring together multiple states to show this progression of how Homer is adapting the image, learning from certain sections that he wants to adjust, and reacting also to advice that he receives eventually 3 years later from a man named Christian Clackner, who he engaged in a business contract as his publisher and dealer. And Judy will share more about this. But this is just an incredibly exciting trio of prints that show this very progression from an early inaugural edition that Homer issued with Ritchie, and then once Clackner gets involved 3 years later, they are working again on this plate, and you see him inscribing this wonderful impression from Terra Foundation proof. And a plate can react, you can work on it endlessly before it's steel-faced, and so it's amazing to just put these together in sequence. No one had done that work before, and through close looking and object-based research, we were able to do so, and we hope people will really enjoy comparing across them with the painting. One of the edits that Homer makes with his publisher is to add what is called a remark in the lower right corner. This is really zoomed in. French for remark or note. A remark is a small original drawing or sketch made in the margin of the plate by the artist. Frequently, this flourish functioned as a way to test the point of an etching needle before working on the composition, but it also served as a marketing device. Because they were sometimes burnished off before printing, remarks were touted by dealers as emblems of rareness and collectability. For Homer and many others, these small marginal vignettes and symbols thematically resonated with the central motif, even at times enhancing the print's meaning. So we see this remark appearing on the Lifeline, but also 8 Bells, and it actually first appears on this print, and it connects very closely to the subject matter of these two mariners using nautical technology to determine their ship's position at sea. So we see the 2 clocks flanking an anchor, it's an anchor between 2 dials, and the vertical arrow that points upwards in the dials indicates noon or midnight, specific times when 8 bells would ring to signal the end of a sailor's shift. The dials also recall the clock face of a chronometer or a compass, both essential for determining a ship's latitude. Homer inserts between them a single anchor, an enduring symbol of hope and security, to further underscore the idea explored in the main image of strategies and struggle for survival in an unforgiving and unpredictable ocean. So these are just some of the amazing artifacts and details from these prints that really add nuance and resonance to our understanding of what Homer is doing with the composition and the ideas he's trying to channel. Following that work on the Lifeline, Homer moves to Maine. He moves to Prout's Neck. And the remainder of his prints within this body of etchings were undertaken after he had permanently relocated to Prout's Neck in 1884. Yet Homer and Ritchie continue their close correspondence from that point forward. And Judy will also share more of that correspondence, but Ritchie would essentially send grounded, prepared plates for Homer to work on, and then they would vary them back and forth with various notes for refinement. And Homer would conduct periodic trips to New York to oversee the final printing at Ritchie's shop. But I was just so enamored by this idea of Homer making these prints in the studio. This was a story that had been unknown to me until I encountered the wonderful work of my predecessor, Diana Greenwald, who included a display acknowledging the etchings in the reinterpretation of the Homer studio from 2022. And I just thought, if this is a new story to me, it might be new to others, and there might be something there. And sure enough, there was. This is a great image by a contemporary of Homer's by the name of Charles Adams Platt, a leading painter-etcher of the era who offered a portrait of his printing atelier in this 1888 painting, A Corner in an Etcher's Studio. This intimate depiction of Platt's working conditions and tools helps shed light on the probable features of Homer's own. He's portraying an easel, copper plates propped at left, stacks of etchings and related drawings, as well as a shallow tray here in the right here, which would have held the acid solution that set the image. Interestingly, no press is visible in this image. Some artists printed their etchings with personal hand presses, but others, like Homer, relied on professional printers for this aspect of the process. So I include this just because it offers us a glimpse into how Homer's workspace at Prout's Neck maybe looked. You know, they probably shared some resemblance to this contemporaneous scene. And certainly, Homer's prints transcended any related challenges of this long-distance relationship. We see how elaborate, grand scale, and ambitious these designs are that we argue evince an irrepressible captivation with the medium as he's going along and building his skills in this print technique. But of course, Homer was very invested in his business. He needed to make money, and all artists have hustles and ways that they build a profit while working on passion projects at the same time. And so these motivations were also financial, and we were excited to discover these bills of sale that he had with his publisher, who I mentioned earlier, Christian Clackner. And these tell us that the profit outcomes from this partnership were ultimately disappointing. Evidence from the quarterly accountings dated April 1892 and October 1893 show that the sales were sluggish. And in fact, the photogravures that Clackner also offered, which we see in this brochure that he issued, shows that the photogravures actually sold more readily and at a higher price than the etchings. And so there's a lot of speculation about why that might have been. But of course, the photogravures are photomechanical, they're cheaper, and Homer's etchings are just extremely extravagant and serious, and sometimes engage with these life-saving themes that have a level of danger and seriousness to them that perhaps didn't connect with a buying public and were very different from the other etching revival works. So it was fun to kind of think about why they didn't sell, but Homer continues to make them even past knowing that they weren't reaching these prices that he was looking for. For the sake of time, I'm going to just go and focus on this wonderful etching watercolor pairing, and then I'm going to turn it over to Judy. But one of the arguments that I wanted to share was, of course, we see the etchings reproducing or translating the paintings, but the etchings themselves also shaped Homer's compositional perspective and his painting practice in turn. This was a very reciprocal relationship. So this watercolor on the left from the National Gallery, Mending the Nets, represents an especially striking example of that reciprocal relationship that Homer forged between his etching and printing practices. According to the newspaper coverage of the work's 1882 debut, the original version of this watercolor depicted the two fishwives seated against a solid, textured background. When Homer revisited this subject 6 years later in an etching, he situated the figures in a calm marine vista, differentiating shore, ocean, and sky as three distinct bands. He rendered the water beyond as a streak of unetched negative space, providing a highlight through the center of the composition that silhouettes the women's statuesque forms more starkly. Homer was apparently more satisfied with the etching's design, to such an extent that he retroactively applied a similar logic to the pre-existing watercolor by scraping the wall feature away, erasing it from the paper's surface. When he exhibited this new iteration that we see here of the composition in 1891, critics praised the way this new, boldly blank background amplified the physical presence of his subjects. This synergistic art of translation between mediums allowed Homer not only to amplify certain ideas from his painting to a wider audience, but also to evolve aspects of a given subject to suit the demands of a particular technique or audience, and at times to achieve greater visual impact. And I'm just going to close my remarks by offering this incredible, one of the last etchings he makes called Saved, which revisits the earlier Lifeline composition. And it bears this idea out in that it is inextricably linked to the Lifeline predecessor, both painting and print, but it really improves upon the original idea and its visual economy and elegance and the contrast of these figures against this beautiful gestural expanse of water. And then just to conclude, as you make your way through the exhibition, our last gallery includes some of his late lithographs, which again, he practices with his friend Louis Prang, who resurfaces from their days during the Civil War and invites Homer to collaborate on a few other projects. So we have this incredible chromolithograph at the right from the Metropolitan Museum, which showcases a lithographic technology or technique that Prang innovated meant to achieve watercolor facsimiles. And Homer was so struck by the resemblance of the lithograph to a watercolor that he says this is to be looked at as a watercolor hanging up. And this is from 1896, and Homer passes in 1910. And I think this helps us remind us how Homer remained engaged with printmaking across nearly every decade of his career. And as Lloyd Goodrich, one of the great Homer biographers, articulated, Homer began his career as a graphic artist and essentially remained one all his life. And we think this show really celebrates that fact. Please join me in welcoming Judy to the stage to share some of the conservation findings.
Well, I'm really happy to be here today. And before I start, I'm a conservator, and I want you all now to think about how it is that conservators are the ones that insisted museums be air-conditioned. In 1884, when Homer decided to make an etching after his great painting, The Lifeline, he had every reason to assume he'd be successful. He was an accomplished artist. He could draw. He had long experience in creating expressive compositions. He could think in black and white, and he had been involved in printmaking for most of his career. And as an apprentice in a lithography shop, Homer would draw in waxy crayon on a lithostone, then turn it over to someone else for lettering and printing. He had little or no control over his images and vowed he would never have anything to do with a publisher again. Yeah, famous last words. Instead, he became a freelance illustrator, selling drawings to the Victorian press. In the press system, the artist was paid for a drawing. That was the end of the artist's control. The drawing was copied onto a wooden block, and then that was turned over to a team of carvers who created the matrix. Better? Sorry. Thank you, Mark. Very subtly done. So the drawing was copied onto a wooden block by someone else, and the block was disassembled with multiple carvers doing some portion of it. And then the block was reassembled and printed. Again, he had no control over what it looked like. Artist etchings are completely different. The artist draws on the plate, oversees the etching process, creating the matrix, and collaborates with a master printer for the inking and production of the edition. So etching was a stretch for Homer, even though he had been involved in printmaking for more than 25 years. This is Homer's first etching from 1875. It's a simple line drawing inscribed and etched. It was probably done in one sitting, perhaps at a club meeting where the members of the club are trying etching, and printed at that time. In 1884, he had a greater ambition, not only in size. This is sort of the proportional image for you. They're not only in size, his prints are big, and they're about they're much bigger than his contemporaries were making etchings. They're also a lot more complicated in technique than his contemporaries were making. They're completely realized figures held in an intricate background of stormy sea and sky. There's shading, there's texture, there's movement. But how did he learn to make these prints, and how did he make them in his studio in Maine? The process of etching was the same as he had used in 1875. The artist obtains a polished copper plate. The diagram at the right is a cross-section of this. I'm going to run through this quickly, and I encourage you to watch the movie in the exhibition because it is great, and it just demonstrates this so much more clearly. But anyway, we'll go through this. The plate is heated and then coated with a wax and asphaltum ground. The ground is dark, so the next steps can be visible to the artist. The artist draws a sharp tool, usually just a needle, through the coating to reveal the bright copper below. The goal is to remove the ground while not scratching the copper. The artist could see the lines as they were made and complete the first draft of the print. The plate was then immersed in a bath of acid, probably nitric acid in Homer's day, and that acid corrodes the copper where the drawing has exposed it. Here you see a small plate in an etching bath, but we know Homer used a different method, which was better for larger plates. Although porcelain or waxed fabric trays were available for etching, Homer used walling wax. Walling wax is a traditional material in metal plate etching. It's a pliable, tough mixture of wax and tallow that was used to build up a temporary wall or bank around the etching plate. Coils of the wax were made and then pressed around the perimeter of the plate. This creates a shallow, leak-proof trough with the copper plate as the bottom. The corrosive etching acid was poured directly onto the copper plate and held for the requisite time. We know Homer used walling wax because we see evidence in the prints. Because Homer drew to the very edge of his first plates, some lines were blocked by the walling wax and so were not exposed to the etching fluid. At the bottom right edge of the print, you see blank areas where the walling wax protected the plate from the etching acid. The plate is then cleaned, and the corroded furrows are filled with ink, which is transferred to paper upon rolling the plate through a printing press. The lines become deeper and darker the more time they're exposed to the acid, and the plate can be removed, rinsed, recoated to protect specific lighter passages from additional time in the corrosive bath. The whole could be clean and revarnished and re-etched numerous times. The process can be repeated as often as needed to get the image the artist wants, but at each stage, the artist probably wants to see proofs to evaluate the image and see how it's developing. This is a very different way for a painter to work. In drawing or painting, an artist can see immediately the effect of any line or color that they add. Etching is slow. It happens in steps, and it requires another person, the printer, and to make the intermediate proofs to assess your progress along the way. The printer was a critical partner for the artist to make the image a reality. The printer could impart variations in the plate by adjusting the ink or by leaving ink on the surface in the unetched areas. The production of painters' etchings was a cooperative venture that was different from other printmaking Homer had done throughout his career. And as a man who was particularly private about his process and when he was working, it may have been a stretch for him to share that with another person. Homer's printer was G.W.H. Ritchie, an etcher and master printer who was about 20 years Homer's junior. He was a founder of the Etching Club in Brooklyn and was vice president of the Salmagundi Club. He ran a print shop in New York from about 1870, where he printed for a number of prominent artists. He was the obvious choice for Homer to seek out as he determined to learn etching and create ambitious prints. Here are two examples of Ritchie's own work, two very small etchings like this, that reproduce paintings by George Innes and George McCord. I show you these to offer a glimpse of Ritchie's prowess in etching and to make comparison with Homer's later technique. In the top print, you can see that Ritchie has used a needle to create a series of contour parallel lines that curve around to indicate clouds. And in the lower print, the detail of the foreground shows the artist's use of a dot pattern of faint ink behind the staccato lines of the field. Similar techniques were used in the first of Homer's prints, the Lifeline from 1884, which Homer made in Ritchie's studio in New York. The print is a complicated sampler of techniques. There's both line and tonal etching, scraping out of lines and burnishing to reduce the tonal work. Dry point lines were added to correct areas. One assumes Ritchie demonstrated these techniques for Homer, as well as printing the intermediate proofs needed to judge the work. Like Ritchie's prints, Homer used parallel lines that describe the forms with a soft dotted pattern of tone behind. This detail of the breeches buoy shows the tonal etching in better detail. I think that the tone here was added by a mixture of sulfur and olive oil that would be painted on the plate to lightly corrode the metal. This would seem a familiar technique to Homer. It's analogous to applying a glaze in oil painting or a wash in watercolor. Some of the tone has been burnished to reduce or remove it, like erasing or scraping a watercolor passage, as Homer often did. The tool you see is a burnisher, which would be used to polish the copper to reduce the bite made by the sulfur. After that print, Homer stepped away from etching for 2 years. 2 years in which he painted 6 major oil paintings, made a couple of big sales, moved to Prout's Neck, moved into his studio, and made his first trip to the tropics. That was a momentous couple of years. He also turned 50. His second successful print, 8 Bells, Homer probably started in the studio at Prout's Neck and then went back to New York City for proofing and editioning. He spent a lot of time in New York City about the time this came out. Here you see the proof sheet Homer sent to the Library of Congress to copyright the image and a finished impression printed on parchment that is held at the Museum of Fine Arts. This back and forth from Prout's to New York set the pattern for all Homer's subsequent etching. When making this print in Maine, Homer did not use the tonal methods we saw in the Lifeline. 8 Bells is all lines. It's reminiscent of Ritchie's Sky, but look at these lines, they're really beautiful. Imagine the time and concentration taken to do this. Homer was really getting into it and figuring out his own methods. Contour lines in the sailor's coat were augmented by cross-hatching to create shadows and depth in the inking, and a fine layer of plate tone was left to shade some areas. This requires a really good printer to make an etching come alive. Many times the printer will have the ink on the plate and then lift it up with their hands in the area where they want the ink to be especially wonderful. And so the artist stands there with the printer and say, yes, I like that, no, I don't like that, and get it done. So it was really great. Not all of Homer's first efforts were successful. His images of the painting Undertow were both abandoned. The faces were overbitten and so printed gray and muddy. That's a flaw that really can't be corrected easily. To take the plate, turn it upside down, and hammer the back where the plate, and it's too much. So he asked Ritchie instead to send him more plates. At the same time, despite his vow never to deal with another publisher, Homer contracted with Christian Clackner, a publisher of artist prints in New York, to publish and market his prints. Clackner professionalized the whole enterprise that Homer and Ritchie had started. For Clackner, the Lifeline was reworked and printed in green on paper, and 8 Bells was issued in black on paper and parchment. I think in part, the variation of these printings was Clackner's effort to explain to Homer how great he could be and what a big help he would be in Homer's marketing of these prints. Clackner had Homer and Ritchie fix the walling wax evidence in both the Lifeline and 8 Bells, and after that, Homer always left space on the plate for the needs of the publisher, which included inscriptions in the plate that gave credit to the printer, asserted the publisher's important copyright against pirating of the images, and honored the artist who etched his signature in the plate and then signed the print in pencil in the margin. Clackner also had Homer sketch small designs in the margins, as Ramey has told you, and there's a wonderful essay about these remarks in the catalog, which I encourage you to buy. Finally, Clackner saw that the copper plates were steel-faced. In this process, a very thin electrolytic layer of steel is put on the plate to protect the soft copper from scratches and wear as it was printed. This ensures the possibility of long runs of the print if they were needed for sales. Mending the Tears was Homer's next print after 8 Bells, and different from the stormy scenes of Lifetime and 8 Bells. 2 women are on the shore, one engaged in repairing a fishing net and the other knitting a sock. Ritchie would send the copper plates with their grounds by mail to Prout's Neck. Homer would draw on the plates, and he also etched the plates at Prout's Neck. He did not have the present studio room that we visit at Prout's Neck. That came in 1890, so I assume he placed the plates on a table or sawhorses outdoors to etch the plate. Surely this was a fair weather activity. In fact, there are letters from Homer to Ritchie dated in early November saying that Homer had etched this plate, and it took 6 hours for the first line to go by. That's perhaps an indication of the temperature of the cool air in which he was trying to do this activity. Homer now used only fine contour lines that merge into a soft tone. Some artists use dots or tools to create such soft tones. Homer had used sulfur tints before, but now he's stuck to repeated light lines. The background is only slightly etched, leaving a delicate web of line for the sunny sky and sea. When Homer drew the figures or waves or clouds, he would use an economical drawing method. He drew lines continuously across the space and then would go back and reserve parts of them for white areas. So here in the arm, the forearm of the knitter and the skirt of the woman, before etching, well, he drew lines. And then before etching, he painted a blocking agent over the continuous lines to reserve whites for the knitting needles. And this is visible in the proof. A subsequent etching bath added details to the needles and shading in the fingers. These we see in the editioned print. Also, if you compare the print to the watercolor on the wall, the line that he adds to the edition print is a black line that you can see very clearly in the watercolor. And above the black line on the watercolor, he's put white highlights to do exactly what he's done here. When the plate was etched, Homer sent it to Ritchie in New York for proofing. Ritchie would send the prints and plate back to Homer for his approval and further work. But finally, Homer would go to Ritchie's shop in New York for the last discussions about the impression and for the editioning and signing the completed prints. We have only 2 prints that suggest the back and forth between the artist and printer. These are very interesting. There are only a very few impressions of a voice from the cliffs, 6, I think, total, and 2 happen to be in Maine. The copy at Bowdoin shows white chalk marks along the top of the cliff ridge. In the copy at Colby, these areas have been burnished to soften the edge and reconfigure the cliff. Here is the negotiation between the artist and the printer, the level of detail that concerned Homer in the production of his etchings. Most often, we chart changes in the printing by comparing the proofs to the editioned print. And in this case, we have an example at the upper left corner of the final iteration of the print saved from 1889. We found several subtle changes between the proof and the edition print. Here you can see 4 areas in a small space where changes were documented in the edition state of the print. In the red oval, Homer carved dry point lines into the plate to adjust the runoff from the wave, and then used a scraper to remove the resulting burr so it would not hold extra ink in printing. Below that, in the blue oval, additional lines were etched into the plate in a subsequent bath. In the green line, you can see that some lines were reduced by burnishing. And in the yellow, Homer used a roulette, a rotating toothed wheel, to add shading. All these changes make the rock seem more dimensional. They suggest that Homer was fully fluent in the many ways etching can be enriched by subsequent working. In the exhibition, there's a marvelous video of Winslow Tramer making an example of this, and you can see that they're using these same tools, and you can see in this video how the tools were handled and used. Only one etching tool can be associated with Homer. It's a diamond dry point needle, and we have it in the exhibition. It belongs to the Museum of Fine Arts. Homer's needle is especially interesting. It has a diamond tip. The diamond tip was chosen, we think, to minimize the usual feathering that a dry point burr produces. Here you see a self-portrait by Whistler and an impression from the same plate after Whistler canceled the plate by using a dry point to scratch it out. The dry point lines are made without acid. It's simply, the copper is not dissolved, but it's cut out of the lines. As a dry point needle plows through the copper, it throws up a bit of copper called a burr. The burr catches ink in printing and makes this beautiful feathery effect. Apparently, Homer did not want this, so he chose a needle that minimized the burr, and then he used a scraper to reduce any residual effect of the burr. By the fall of 1889, when Homer made his last etching, he was beginning to explore new ways of using paint. His watercolors from this summer were spectacularly different from his previous work in the medium. He began to flow paint into pools and almost slosh it around on the sheet to make these expressive paintings. Now he stopped describing nature and began to show his emotional response to it. He made this black and white watercolor specifically for transcription to the etching plate. In fact, he traced the central image onto the etching ground to transfer the image one-to-one. This is what he had learned to do in making wood engravings 35 years before. To replicate the watercolor, he made an attempt at a painterly etching, a work that depended on the fluidity of the medium rather than the control of line. In this experiment, he relied on the complicated combination of tonal and line etching. The background is an aquatint, a tonal etching method in which a reticulated ground is made from melting particles of rosin on the plate. The rosin is held over the plate in a bag, and you do that and the dust falls. And each of those little bits of dust is then melted. When you etch it, where the rosin islands are, it doesn't get etched. So you have little islands of white with these dark lines around them, and your eye blends it. Over the aquatint, Homer brushed stop out to protect the white areas in the waves around the boat and the area needed for the reflection of the boat. The second proof of this we have is from the Library of Congress. It was submitted to secure the copyright for the image. This is an intermediate state where the aquatint background has been reduced, probably by rubbing the aquatint with charcoal and olive oil. The figure in the boat had been made more pronounced and dark by additional etching work. In the finished state, Homer reduced the aquatinted foreground and background even more, further emphasizing the fisherman. He then apparently painted etching fluid directly on the plate to insert the tree on the far shore of the lake. This is the iteration that Clackner published. At last, we see how easily Homer manipulated the etching process. Here he completely inverted the light-dark balance in the print. But etching is not painting. And after fly fishing, Homer did not make another etching. He returned his concentration to painting. Two practical things fascinate me about the prints, beyond the obvious interest in the subject matter and technique. The first is that Homer organized his life so that by 1886, he was pretty much self-sufficient at Prout's Neck. He could rely on the mail and his support team of printer and publisher in New York for the business end of his printing enterprise. Thanks to them, he was able to make these prints on his own in relative isolation in Maine. Soon he had established a similar system for his paintings. Regaling his dealers in New York with correspondence that alternately thanked and instructed them, Homer continued to enjoy his success as an artist living in Maine, making only necessary visits to Boston and New York. At 50 years old, this was not retirement, but it was remote working. We're all for it. The second thing I note is that Homer seemed to love making these prints. They engaged all of his non-watercolor work for 3 years. This chart shows you what artworks Homer completed in the years we're thinking about, 1884 through 1890. You can see that in 1885 and 1886, he was making 6 great paintings. He did not make etchings, although he had made one in 84. But likewise in 87, 88, and 89, when he was making his 6 great etchings, he was not making oil paintings. This is interesting. I think we can say with great confidence that these etchings held his artistic interest for 3 years when he was at the height of his powers. Making lines and working the plates must have fascinated Homer as a different way to make art that was not as immediate as painting or drawing. He may have been intrigued by rendering an image in a different medium and removing the color. We understand that he was a man who enjoyed learning a new thing. We see how he concentrated on a skill until he mastered it. He characterized his etchings as hard work, but some of his best. Whatever the cause, etching occupied him for 3 years at the height of his powers. The etchings mark a very exciting episode in his long career, and we're fortunate to be able to study them in this new exhibition.
Thank you so much, Judy. Thank you all. We're a little bit over time, but are there questions in the audience? Because we're happy to stay. Yes, okay. There might be a mic. Is there a mic coming your way, or? I can't see. Here it is, right here.
I was just curious how large the editions were of these various works that you're talking about.
Let me take it? Yeah. We don't know. There have been different estimates. They're probably under 100 of each one, people have said. During the course of our research, we found that the printer inventoried all of the prints, put little numbers in the bottom corner, and you can see that on a print in the show. The numbers go up to 376. They're prefaced by an H, which we think probably stands for Homer. So we think of for all the etchings that Ritchie printed. So there's probably 376 to more etchings that were made of all 6 prints. So I think 65 is a better average for how many prints were made than the 100 that have been suggested.
Any other questions?
Oh, good.
Well, we will hang out here if anyone wants to come see us for a little bit. Thank you all so much for your time, and enjoy the show.